1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. Minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Zyad Rasheed, your host from Gatineau, Quebec, Canada, welcoming you to another episode of In the Mix. Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to announce that I have a very dear friend, a very dear professor, a very dear person to my heart, Dr. Andrew Clifford. Andrew Clifford today will be speaking to us about his journey from trauma and grief to life coaching. Andrew Clifford, to those who don't know him, let me give you a very short bio about him. In his professional life, Dr. Clifford is the director and the master of conference interpreting at York University program. He trains conference interpreters and people who perform conference interpreters are people who perform complex cognitive tasks in public and under high pressure. Together with his students, he finds ways to make mistakes with dignity and to bounce back after failure with humor and love. In his personal life, Dr. Clifford is a survivor of post-traumatic stress depression. His partner died suddenly and unexpectedly in 2018, and his son committed suicide in 2021. Grief put him on a journey to immense personal growth, and he's now training as a life coach. Together with his clients, he explores pathways forward after trauma and loss. And today, Andrew is here to speak about this. In less than 20 seconds, I'll be speaking with Andrew about this journey and what led him to life coaching. I have a lot of questions to ask Andrew, and you too, if you have anything in mind or you just want to say hello to Andrew, please feel free to chat with us in the chat box, whether you're following us from Twitter, Instagram, X, YouTube. Please feel free to ask, and we will bring the comment here on the screen and talk with you and answer all your questions. In less than 20 seconds, I'll be seeing Andrew Clifford here with us in the stage. So please stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please welcome with me to the stage Dr. Andrew Clifford. Hi, Andrew. Good morning.
Hey, Zyad. Good morning to you, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our audience, depending on where they are.
Yes, of course. How are you today? Is everything good?
Good,
At
thank you.
last, it happened. There we go. And we are in live together talking about your journey.
Yes.
And Andrew, before we go to the nitty gritty, what leads you to life coaching? And this is the main topic that I'm going to discuss with you today. But I need to know first, what is life coaching, and do we as human beings need a life coach? Yes,
Those are great questions and a good place to start. So thank you for that.
thank you.
Um, what is a life coach? um, Maybe it's easiest to start at the beginning. I think initially life coaching was something that happened in the United States, and it was very much an attempt to take some of the know how that was in the realm of sports, for example, coaches for Olympic athletes and whatnot, and to bring it into the business sector. And from there, it spread. I think it still does have links with the corporate world. So, for example, I'm in a training program now with about maybe 10 other people, or 10 people in total.
Yes,
And when I initially looked at the bios of all the people before the courses started, I thought, oh, I'm really the only one that's coming from somewhere other than the corporate sector. And the woman who's our trainer, her background is in finance. And so that's kind of where things begin, but that's not where it ended.
yes,
So, um, for example, um, people recognize, I think, the value for life coaching and their well-being. And so people started to come and consult life coaches, not just to perform better in a work environment, but also for their actual lives, for their personal benefit.
yes,
And that's where we start to get a little bit of a blurry line between life coaching and therapy. Yeah.
yes,
So currently, in most places, you don't have to have any kind of credentials in order to be a life coach. So Zyad, today, in fact, you could hang out a shingle and say, "Hi, I'm Zyad. I'm a life coach," and nothing would stop you from doing that. Unlike,
without any training or school credentials. Okay,
exactly, it's not regulated in any way.
okay,
Unlike, say, psychiatry or psychology, you
of course.
cannot say that you are a certified psychologist unless you have a PhD in clinical psychology and unless
Yes,
you're a member of a professional order, right, and in good standing.
yes,
Yeah, so life coaching is different. There are no constraints on it. And so some of the other people who are involved in helping the general public take care of mental health started to lean in and say, wait, what exactly is it that you're doing there? Because you don't have any training and you don't have to have any credentials. And so life coaching has started to professionalize itself.
yes.
We're seeing a couple of things happen. There is actually a movement to certify.
Mhm.
So there's the International Coaching Federation, which is based in the
As,
United States, which is spreading wider.
as
And
with
they have,
everything else, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they have a certification exam that you can take. And so if you want to be a life coach and on your shingle that you put out, say I'm certified, then you
Yes.
can do the ICF certification.
Okay. Now, does it make any difference to be certified or uncertified? What does certification give you? Because I think this will also relate to what does a life coach actually do?
Right,
Because
right, right, right.
that's maybe my follow-up question to the first one.
Sure thing.
Yes.
Um, so as I say, there is no external requirement for you to have the training or to be certified, right? There's
Yes.
nothing to stop you, any of us, from saying I'm a life coach. And there are people out there who haven't had formal training or don't have any kind of certification, um, and who are operating quite successfully as life coaches. So is it something that you have to do? No. But what are the benefits of doing it? Ask me maybe when I'm certified. But
Yes.
the training anyway I can speak to. The
Yes.
training I can speak to say, well, it is actually, first of all, it's connecting me with a group of people who are similarly minded.
Yes.
And one of the things that I discovered initially, I kind of looked at the group of people that I was training with and thought, oh, I'm going to be quite different from everybody else. They seem to all come from business. They all seem to have very um, mainstream looking profiles. And I'm this guy over here with the tattoos and the ring in his nose. And what I found is that that actually wasn't the case. Everybody in the group actually had some point of common interest with me. There's another woman who identifies as LGBTQ.
Yes.
There's somebody who lived in Ottawa, as I did. There's somebody who lives in Kingston, and I lived there to go to school for a time, and so on and so forth. And so there were, just seeing the shout out there from Heba. Hi, Heba. How are you?
Hi, Hiba. Good to see you. Yes.
And so there are some commonalities there. And it's a good mix of people. The other thing so it connects you with other people who are doing the same thing, right? The other thing that I would say about the training is it presents you with a model which is extremely interesting. And we can talk about the model if you want.
Of course.
It is challenging to apply. It's kind of counterintuitive in some cases. And there's an ongoing debate that I've had. I have a life coach of my own. I've worked, I think, in total with about 4 life coaches. And none of them in their practice use the model strictly.
And so what are the models, if you can elaborate on that?
The thinking is that what is it that the life coach brings out? Is it knowledge of how the human psyche works? No.
Yes.
Is it knowledge of mental pathologies? No. It's none of those things. So what is a life coach? A life coach is somebody who has the ability to sit with you and to listen and to basically hold your hand while you go on a journey into the self. And life coaching starts from the premise that it's the client who's actually the expert.
And do you give advice? Do you?
That's the big thing about the model is in the training we often talk about the advice monster. It's kind of a natural inclination in many of us when somebody has a problem to say, well, here's what you should do. And what the life coaching model that we're using says, you know what, the client actually knows on a practical level what can be done.
Yes.
Yeah? What they're having difficulty with is processing some sort of emotional barrier that's stopping them from moving forward, right? And so let's explore that emotional barrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's not therapy then, because that's my second point. If you need a life coach that does just as a person to talk to, then where would the therapy be coming from? Okay. Do I still, if I speak to a life coach, for instance, right, do I still need to find a psychiatrist or a psychologist in order to help? What is the role of a life coach in my life?
Right.
How will this person be changing my life if he cannot give me therapy or he cannot give me solutions to my problem? Or in other words, he will be just the shoulder that I can cry on.
So those are excellent questions.
Thank you.
And it gets back to the difference between what is coaching and what is therapy. In a strict sense, a therapist will very often work in a setting where there's been a pathology identified. You have been diagnosed as suffering from depression or an anxiety disorder or PTSD or so on and so forth, right? So that somebody who's able to make a clinical diagnosis and then implement some kind of treatment. In the case of psychiatry, that treatment may be in the form of medications. In the case of psychology, that treatment will be through talk therapy. Yeah?
Yes.
So a life coach doesn't deal with somebody who has an identified pathology. We deal with everyday people who are in a state of well-being. And where a therapist might get you into a therapeutic setting and say to you, hey, Zyad, so tell me about your childhood. So therapy very often will delve into your past to try and use it as a lens for what's happening in your present. And coaching is different. Coaching focuses on your present, what's happening to you now, and trying to use it to set goals and the things that are achievable for you in the future. So the vantage point is a little bit different. So if you were to come into my coaching space and say to me, Andrew, I have to tell you, I had a terrible childhood. I might say to you, okay, that's very nice, but how are you feeling today?
Mm-hmm. In what sense? How are you feeling today? Like generally, or regarding the childhood itself?
Well, you tell me. You tell me, because you get to steer the conversation. What is it that you want to talk about?
Mm.
Yeah. And as for when do I need a life coach and when do I need another form of mental health support? Excellent question. The only thing I can tell you is my own experience. And so after, we're going to get into this story a little bit later, but after my partner died,
Yes.
I knew that I needed help, and so I turned to professionals. And at one point, I was working with 4 different people. I was seeing a psychologist, I was seeing a psychiatrist, I was seeing 2 life coaches. And I have to say, on the whole, in my journey as a client, as a patient, I've seen a total of 4 life coaches, worked with a total of 4 of them. And I have to say that I found it to be much more satisfying than standard therapy, certainly with a psychologist, and almost definitely more satisfying than with a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Many psychiatrists will sit you down and you start to talk to them and they say, yes, 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 here's a prescription, go take this pill. Because
And
many
that's it.
psychiatrists don't want to engage in talk therapy. They don't want to hear what you have to say. They just want you to take a pill and tell them how it's working.
Okay. So can we say in this regard, a life coach will be the first step toward your therapy? A life coach will be the person that you talk to, and then maybe you can pinpoint the main issue in your, let's say, psychological or emotional ailment. And then from there, later on, you can transfer to or move to the next step, which is a psychiatrist or psychologist. Is that what I understand from it? Or I'm wrong? You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would frame it in quite that way. When I think about my own journey, I happen to have already been connected with a life coach before my partner's death, and so that was the person that I turned to first. But that's just
Yes.
me. That's just me because that was the resource that was available. And it so happens that he's quite experienced in mental health generally. And one of the things that he did say to me was, hey, have you thought about medication? And medication means going to see a psychiatrist. And interestingly, the person who pointed me to the psychiatrist was, of all things, my PrEP doctor. So what is PrEP? PrEP is something that many gay men take in order to not contract HIV.
Yes.
So I see a specialist here in Toronto who prescribes my PrEP so that I remain HIV negative. And he's a very good doctor. He's a very good guy. Knew my story and said, hey, how are you doing? And I said, I'm not doing particularly well. And he got me in to see a psychiatrist very quickly.
And maybe if you like, that's a good time to start speaking about your personal journey with trauma and what led you eventually to life coaching. So maybe our friends are very much eager right now to learn about the reasons behind going to life coaching in particular, not with anything else in this kind of practice. But first of all, let's say hello to the audience who are joining us. A very big hello comes from Yusuf Mohammed. Yusuf is saying hello, Yusuf. Good
Hi,
to
Yusuf.
see you. Hi.
Nice
hello.
to hear from you.
Of course. Hello, gentlemen. Thanks, Zyad, for hosting such a great person like Andrew Clifford. My heart was racing and felt nervous upon seeing him on screen. His presence still hits.
Hopefully not with force.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Yusuf, shukran, Habibi. I have a lot of fond memories of working with you. I hope that you are well.
Of course. Best regards to Yusuf. Martin Sheet from Toronto saying love and peace. Hello, Martin. Thank you for joining us. And you have, this message was there from before the show. Can't wait. But now they're saying hello. Hello, Mr. Zyad and Mr. Grief.
Mr. Grief.
And Sightlight, hello. Hi, Dr. Zyad and Andrew. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Good to see you. Yusuf is saying likewise.
No, thank you.
Khaled from Germany. Khaled San Moritz. Hi, Khaled. Good morning to you. Good afternoon, I think, rather, in Germany. Greetings from Germany. Thank you, guys.
Ja, viele schöne Grüße aus Kanada.
Yeah. Thank you, Khaled. There you go. You got something in German from Andrew. He speaks German. And Ronnie, go.
Oh,
Hi, Ronnie. Hello, Zyad and Andrew. Sending love from sunny Toronto. Thank you.
And
Thank
that
you
love
so
is
much.
gratefully received, Ronnie.
Yes. Good to see you, Ronnie. Thank you for being here. So yeah, I think, Andrew, let's talk now about your personal journey and
Sure.
what led you to life coaching from the very beginning. It's a disclaimer. I'm so sorry to everything that you've been through, and it's magnificent and great to come forward and talk about it to everyone. Like, this is, I think, very empowering when someone talk about their grief in public like this. So please feel free to tell us what exactly happened and led you to life coaching, please.
Absolutely. I would say that there were two paths that led me. And maybe the story begins with you, Ziad, and with your cohort, because it was around that time. I think we were a couple of years into the MCI and
Yes.
several cohorts of students in. And it suddenly dawned on me that my job isn't actually to train interpreters. My job is to teach people to love themselves in the face of adversity.
Yes.
Right? Because what is it that we have you do? We have you do these things that are very difficult, and even the most capable, most intelligent people fall down and hurt themselves emotionally, psychologically in the course of the training.
And you're talking about the Master of Conference Interpreting
right.
program at
That's
Glendon University, Glendon College and York University. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I realized that what I was doing in the classroom was actually creating a space, or trying to create a space for people that was a place of safety, that was maybe a place where things are fun, where we get to enjoy ourselves, and above all, practice a form of self-love, a form of self-compassion.
Yes.
And when I realized that, I thought, well, okay, I'm taking steps to achieve that in the classroom. What about in the rest of my life? Wouldn't it be good to live that way in the rest of my life? And lo and behold, along came a man that we'll refer to as Daddy Bear.
Yes.
And it was love at first sight. And the thing that I would say about him is that one of the things that drew me to him was that he was absolutely magical with people. He had this ability to talk to anyone. It could be a friend, it could be someone who was beside us in the gym using another piece of equipment, it could be the waitress who brought us a coffee in a restaurant, it could be the man who checked us into a hotel room. It didn't matter. Daddy Bear had this ability to reach out to people, to connect with them, and to make them feel important, make them feel like they were his best friend. And being his partner was like a giant education in human kindness.
Yes.
And I learned a lot from him. It was incredibly satisfying, incredibly stimulating. He was the love of my life, and it's not an exaggeration, I think, to say my soulmate. So that was all well and good. Very happy point in my life. And then in November of 2018, he was visiting me here in Toronto. And 2 days prior, we had met with a new personal trainer in the gym. We were trying to reach some new goals and really push ourselves hard. And we were both a little bit sore. And he said to me, I have this funny pain across my collarbone. And so I massaged it for him, and he felt a bit better. And over the course of the next 2 hours, that pain came back. And when it came back a third or maybe a fourth time, he got up, ran around the condo, said, I can't get any relief. grabbed a hold of me in a bear hug. His face went white, his head tipped back, and he was gone. He was dead.
Did you know beforehand what was causing that pain, or
No. Assumed that it was related to the workout. I mean, we had trained chest. He had a pain in his chest. It seemed a logical thing. It didn't present like a heart attack. He wasn't saying, I'm short of breath, having, sweating, pain radiating down my left arm. There was none of that. He wasn't actually, from the look on his face, he wasn't in great pain either. Discomfort, yes, but not pain. I'd certainly seen him experience more pain than on that day. And
yes?
so I got him on the ground and started to perform CPR on him, managed to call 911 at the same time. As I was performing CPR, I noticed that he was bleeding profusely from his nose, from his mouth. And so that, I think, was part of what figured into the trauma. I was doing that for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only about 20 minutes. And then the paramedics arrived and they started working on him. They probably worked on him for about half an hour and then put him on a gurney and into an ambulance and off to the hospital. And I followed in a second ambulance. I walked into the emergency room and I didn't even have time to sit down. The nurse came and got me, took me into a private room and said, "He's gone. Would you like to see the body?"
And I mean, I don't have words to ask, because I know that might be the most traumatic experience, because seeing the love of your life dies in your hands. But looking at it now, do you feel that he passed away in a good way, in your hands, not away from you?
Yeah. So that's a really important point. Shortly after he passed, I was diagnosed with PTSD because I had all the very typical PTSD symptoms. I closed my eyes and I saw this rolling video, if you will, just over and over and over again on a loop. I saw the white face when he passed out. I saw the purple face when I got him on the ground. I saw the bloody face when I was doing CPR on him, and I saw the
that's where the trauma comes from, of course.
Yeah. So
yes.
I just kept seeing it over and over again on a loop. I started working with, of all things, a life coach. This life coach was special, though. She had been a hospice nurse in a past life, and so was very knowledgeable, not only about the biological parts of death, but also about grief, because she'd been around so many people who were grieving the loss of somebody who was in palliative care, basically.
Yes.
And she was able to help me through, I think, the worst of the trauma. I stopped, after working with her, I was no longer having the classical PTSD symptoms. And one of the things that she did is she just really helped me to step back and reframe. And she asked me a couple of questions. She said, was he in pain? And I said, well, not really. Discomfort, yes. Pain, no. She said, did he suffer a long time? I said, no, it was very quick. And she said, was he alone? And I said, no, I was holding him. I was holding him in my arms when he went. And she said, minimal pain, fast, and in the arms of the person you love. That's a pretty good death.
That's a good death, yes.
And so you gave somebody a good death. And isn't that how, when it's our turn, all of us might like to go?
And? I'm interested to know.
What would you like to know?
What did you do? What did you do afterwards? I mean, how did this have a toll on your life? What happened to your life after that particular incident?
So, Daddy Bear and I were sort of father figures to a number of younger men, and that I refer to as my sons. There were 3 of them in particular that kind of grouped around me and really supported me in the early days.
And what made you take care of these people in particular? And considering them as your own sons?
It is not uncommon in the gay world. It is actually something that some people would refer to as a leather family or a San Francisco family. It's not unusual for a couple of men to embrace or bring into their lives one more younger man and to serve as father figures. I think it's not an exaggeration to say most gay men did not have a good relationship with their father. In many cases, our fathers rejected us. And so there was no male um, role model for us to identify with. And certainly when we came out and started encountering the realities of gay life, there was nobody there to advise us. One of the things that Daddy Bear said to me, he said, I really struggled as a young gay man. I really had a hard time when I came out of the closet. There were some aspects of gay life that I just did not know how to navigate. And I really wanted somebody there for me. And so it was important to him
Yes.
to be there for other people.
Yes.
So we had or I was lucky enough that the three of these young men rallied around me, kind of circled the wagons around me, and were there for me. And of course, they were grieving his death as well. At a later point in time, one of the young men, this was during the pandemic, developed a substance abuse problem. He became addicted to crystal methamphetamine, and it destroyed his life. He's still alive, thankfully, and I'm told that he's sober, but he's a very different person and had a very significant impact on him. The second man saw me at a point when I was not doing well. And I'll preface this by saying that I was on a series of medications and I got transferred to work with a new psychiatrist who, perhaps in hindsight, was not providing the best care. And so under his care, I went through withdrawal from a benzodiazepine. I was taking as a kind of anti-anxiety medication a benzodiazepine. And I understood him to say that he was switching me from this drug to another drug. And so I stopped taking the benzodiazepine and then had 2.5, 3 weeks of withdrawal. And that was the worst experience of my life. Worse than the actual trauma, I think, of Daddy Bear's passing. It was unreal. For 2.5 weeks, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't sleep. The only thing I could do was pace back and forth the length of my condo, literally 24 hours a day for 2.5 weeks. I thought I was losing my mind. And I kept turning to the psychiatrist and saying, hey, something's really wrong. And at the time I was drinking heavily as, again, a form of therapy. Whatever medications I was on was not taking care of the anxiety that I was feeling. The only thing that would numb it was alcohol. And so I was drinking quite heavily. And he said to me, oh, it's the alcohol. You have to stop drinking. And I looked at him and said, well, granted, the alcohol is not great, but I don't think this is the alcohol that's causing this. And he said to me finally, well, of course, you're still on the benzo. And I said, no, I'm not. He said, what do you mean you're not? I said, well, you told me to stop. And he said, I never told you to stop. So it was then that we figured out that I was experiencing withdrawal. Anyway, getting back to the second young man, he saw me when I was in this state, and it scared him profoundly, and he has never spoken to me since. Then the third, the one that I was closest to, the one that called me 5 times a day initially when Daddy Bear passed away, we'll call the third one Pouncer, because that is the nickname that most people in the gay community know him by. So Pouncer was there for me, came to visit several times, took care of me. And we were getting ready for another visit in September of 2021. And I'll preface this by saying that for about a year prior, he had been having conversations with me that went something like this. He would say, Papa Bear, because that's my name in the community. He'd say, Papa Bear, I'm done. Papa Bear, I've had enough. Papa Bear, I don't see the point. And then he would say,
The point of what?
of life.
Oh,
And then he would say, Papa Bear, I have a plan. And I would try to talk to him about it. I would try to argue. I would try to yell. I would try to persuade softly. I would cry. I would, in that year leading up to the event, I tried everything I knew how to do. And in September of 21, he drove to another city where a friend of his lived. The friend was celebrating a birthday. He took the friend out for dinner for the birthday, and then went back to a hotel room that he had reserved and started texting me. And he said, Papa Bear, I have a plan. And I said to him, I know, baby boy, I know you do. I just need to know whether you're putting the plan in place right now. And of course, he was. And there were a few more short exchanges, and then everything stopped. And he was gone.
oh, my God. I am so sorry. And how far in time these two incidents took place?
So Daddy Bear's passing was in November of 2018. And Pouncer's passing was in September of 21. So almost 3 years apart.
Yeah. And now in 2023, and you're...
Yeah, I mean, there's a
Holding on.
little bit of a ways to go. After Pouncer's suicide, I mean, my mental health, it was like imagine a truck driving off a cliff and plummeting into a deep canyon. That was what it felt like. I just remember having the sensation of falling, being terrified and not really knowing what was happening around me. I, at that point, tried to stop drinking. The anxiety I was experiencing was out of control, and I wound up in the hospital because my resting heart rate was 190 beats a minute. And so I was very much at risk of having a cardiac event.
Because of
The anxiety.
drinking and anxiety.
The anxiety.
I mean,
I had stopped drinking at this point.
Okay, but do you think drinking has aggravated it, or?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I'm not
Okay.
a medical doctor. I couldn't begin to tell you.
Okay.
But thankfully, in the hospital, there was a psychiatrist who was very clever, and he said, "We're going to put you on another medication. Why don't you try this?" And what he gave me was something called gabapentin, which is used for a variety of things. I have a friend who takes it for nerve pain, of all things.
Yes.
But apparently it has a use in treating anxiety, and specifically, it's not a bad idea when somebody's drinking because apparently it binds the same receptor in the brain that creates the craving for alcohol.
Yes.
So within, I would say, about 20 minutes of taking that first pill, the anxiety was gone.
Oh,
And so too was any desire to drink.
okay.
So thankfully, I was concerned that I was facing a problem with addiction, and thankfully I wasn't, because after that, alcohol was no longer a problem.
Okay. So right now, you stopped drinking cold turkey, and you started to come back to your life.
I would say yes. It was at that point that I
And
started to come back. A short time later, met a man and we started dating. And a short time after that, I met another man and we started dating. So I had two partners for a period of time. Also, the anxiety began to come back. And I was still noticing.
why?
So much,
Why it's coming back this time
question.
now?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer, except to say that trauma has a way of lodging itself in the body. And until you free it from the body, it tends to stay put. And so I think that the drug worked for a time and then over time lost its effectiveness. The anxiety came back, maybe not the emotional component of anxiety. I was no longer feeling terrified all the time, but some of the physical symptoms, so elevated heart rate, um, jitteriness, difficulty um, digesting food, nausea, feelings of faintness that I was going to pass out. Those
Yes.
things stayed with me. And in January of last year, I began something a little bit innovative and different. Um, there is a thing now within mental health, treating people who have long-standing mental health problems that are resistant to other treatments. So in my case, I'd been on medication, it had lots of talk therapy. Well, those things benefited me to an extent. The problem was still uh, acute enough that it was interrupting my normal life. And so I began something called ketamine therapy. Ketamine is a psychedelic. You take ketamine in substantial amounts and you will have an out-of-body experience, lights and music and all the rest of it.
That's how you feel after taking it?
Yeah, for about an hour. So
Okay.
ketamine therapy, what's coming to light right now is that initially when psychedelics were sort of developed in some cases and discovered in others, they were being used by um, by the research and mental health community to treat patients, or at the very least, they were being used in clinical tests to see if they were viable forms of treatment. Um, and what the early research literature in the 1950s and 60s began to show is that yes, that they had a role in treating patients. In some cases, um, I think it's not out of place to say the word miraculously,
Hmm.
because there are people who say that after several treatments, they never again were faced with the problems they had in the past. It went away substantially. So, unfortunately, society began to look in the 1960s upon psychedelics, especially like LSD, associated with the hippie counterculture, with maybe a criminal element, and very quickly became anti-psychedelic, and all this legislation was passed.
Yes.
And in more recent years, we're discovering, in large part because many indigenous communities have ceremonies using healing ceremonies that use psychedelics. And so this attracted the interest of researchers again. Enough data got collected to persuade government bodies to allow clinical trials and this sort of thing. And so in Canada, ketamine is actually approved for use by Health Canada um, in mental health therapy. And so in my case, I qualified because I had been on talk therapy, I'd been on medication, and they were limited in their effectiveness. And so I met the criteria. I went into a private clinic,
Yes.
and what they do is they sit you down in a really nice room. It's very comfortable. You're in a lounge chair lying back. You've got a warm blanket around you. They put the lights dim and whatever color you want them to be. Give you some eye shades and some headphones to listen to some really soothing music.
Yes.
And they put a lozenge under your tongue. You let it dissolve. And usually within about 15 minutes, you start having a trip. You leave the body and see all kinds of fantastic things. We can get into that in a moment. But the whole idea behind this, what they find is there are two benefits. One, in a short window of time after the use of the psychedelic, they find that there's increased neuroplasticity. So in other words, the brain is more capable of learning and changing. New
Hmm.
connections get forged. The other thing is that we all have this system that is based in the brain, so based in the biology, called the default mode network, and it's kind of the the parts of the brain that allow us to kind of perceive the world around it and interpret it. And that default mode network is kind of set, yeah. And we really don't change the way we look at the world very often. What happens with a psychedelic is that it tends to turn the default mode network off, and we begin to look at the world in new ways. So if our old way of understanding the world, our set of assumptions, was leading us to experience depression or anxiety, then all of a sudden that's lifted, and we get a chance to kind of look at the world with fresh eyes. Imagine you're on a ski hill that's
Yes.
very popular, and so people have gone down, and there are tracks already fairly well set in the snow, because so
Yes.
many people have gone down the exact same path.
Yes.
Imagine there's a heavy snowfall and it's virgin snow, and
Mhm.
you can go wherever you want now. Yeah, and so that's a
Okay.
bit like what happens when the default mode network is suspended.
Yes.
And so that's what researchers are telling us is the cause of the benefit that we see.
Okay. Let's read some comments. Martin was telling me a story here in his comment, saying in Iraq we have a story of the two heroes, one who went to bring water but could not do it on time, and his brother, best friend, an ideal person, died in his arms. People use this as PTSD therapy. Martin, can you elaborate more on this story, please? And thank you for your comment. There's a question from Sightlight, and I think maybe that's not the appropriate time. Maybe we can talk about it. I'm going to postpone it to the end of the interview because they're asking about how to get a master's degree of conference interpreting from London. So we'll talk about this later in the broadcast. I promise. So just forgive me for now because I'm going to postpone talking about this. But rest assured, all comments will be answered and all comments will be read and brought here on the screen. So Andrew, again, that's a lot to take in. I personally now felt the vicarious trauma.
Okay.
From
deep breathing, maybe.
From yes, from what I've heard so far, and
remember your training, Zyad. Don't picture anything, or if you have to, picture it in black and white.
Yes, yes, you did a great deal in that. So Andrew, now after you felt all that and after you've been through all that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think you kept it behind your back. You still definitely live with it, or how are you dealing with it? How are you dealing now? That's what interests me.
Yeah. So I would say in my case, many people, there's a lot of research, for example, that would say somebody who's on psychedelic therapy. I remember there was one study that I looked at, and something like 50% of the people during the study reported that they were no longer experiencing PTSD after going through a cycle of psychedelics. And then
Yes.
when they contacted those people a year later, that number had risen to something like 75%.
Okay.
So 75% of the people in the study were no longer experiencing PTSD, and those that were said that there was improvement in their symptoms. So basically, 100% of the people in the study had experienced some form of change in their experience of PTSD, a positive change.
Okay.
So I would say in my case that, if we started off, up here, I would say that talk therapy brought me there.
Okay.
And then medication took me here. And then psychedelic therapy brought me here. But I'm still not at ground zero. And so it continues to be a journey. It continues to be a voyage. And the one thing that I would say is that maybe this is where we can kind of change the tide of the conversation, is that while all of these things are sad, all of these things are difficult and painful, it was also a journey of extraordinary joy. There are moments in time where I had the most incredible connections with people and with events, and began very quickly to realize that joy and sorrow are flip sides of the same coin.
But you managed to find joy within your grief.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that there is a way to find happiness. There is a way to find joy. There is a way to find magic and beauty in the path, even when you're experiencing some dark moments.
And that's an excellent point. And that's a very great way to look at it. Because you hold the remote control in your hands and you can flip chain things if you want to, and only if you want to.
So, for example,
So,
about a month after Daddy Bear died,
yes.
I flew to San Francisco for his memorial. San Francisco is where he lived. And then friends of mine in Houston said to me, why don't you come here? And at
Yes.
the time, I was thinking, I am such a mess. I don't want to be around people. I just feel like I want to go home and hide in a corner. And then one of the friends said to me, look, are you going to feel miserable if you're at home? And I said, yes. Are you going to feel miserable if you're with us? And I said, yes. And he said, so what's the difference? Come. So I did. The friends in question, they're a throuple. If your listeners don't know what that is, that's when gay men decide to enter into a relationship, not with two people, but with three.
Mm-hmm.
And so the throuple took care of me while I was with them. They were beautiful men. And also, this is when Pouncer was still alive, and Pouncer was within traveling distance of Houston. And so one day they set time aside and said, you're coming with us. And don't ask where we're going. I'm just going to take you. And so we went to a shopping mall, the three of them, Pouncer and me. And we walk into a Build-A-Bear store. And we began to build a teddy bear. And so there's a part where you start to stuff. We picked up the bear. We stuffed the bear. And one of them said, I give you this photo. It was a photo of the two of us together. It was taken by a professional photographer. It was very beautiful. And he said, I'm going to put this in the bear's head so that you always think of Daddy Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other three men each had a little heart. And as we were stuffing the bear, we got to its chest, and they one by one put the hearts in. And the first
Yes.
man said, this is my gift of courage to you. This is my gift of strength. And then Pouncer put in the third heart and said, this is my gift of love. And they sewed up the bear. And we picked out some clothes that were maybe typical of what Daddy Bear would wear. There was a camouflage baseball cap. Daddy Bear always wore camouflage. And we found he always wore kilts too. He never wore pants. So we were able to find a kilt for the bear, which was hilarious. And of course, by this time, we get to the cash register and they're paying for the bear. And I'm a mess. Right? I'm just sobbing uncontrollably. And there's a woman in the store who walks over to me and just says, can I give you a hug? And I said, sure. And she gave me a hug, and then she pulled away and she said, I don't know what's happened to you, but I could tell that you're grieving. And I just wanted to tell you that I forget the order of things, but she had lost her mother, her husband had died, and then she lost both of her children, her adult children, to addiction or something. And so I'm standing there with my one loss and her four, and I just looked at her and I said, how are you still here? How are you still standing? And she said to me, it's simple. She said, my faith is stronger than my pain.
Very well said.
Yeah. So, I mean, that entire event, from the friends to the bear to Pouncer being there to the woman, I mean, all of that is absolutely magical. It felt engineered and orchestrated. And one of the things that I've discovered in working with my clients as a life coach is that their lives too, even though they're grieving, in most cases, are facing some kind of trauma, because that's who has kind of gravitated to me as a life coach. Even though they're facing all of those things, there is incredible, astounding, stunning beauty and joy in their lives.
Yes. Martin, again, elaboration. The two brothers died in battle, fighting injustice. It resonates with people as an epic representation of the crucifixion. though he's elaborating on that story.
Okay.
Yusuf has a question. He's saying, what do you think has helped you the most to stay sane to date, despite these two massive tragedies?
Oh, wow. Great question, Yusuf.
And then he has a follow-up question. I'll
Okay.
show it to you later on after you answer this
Okay.
one.
I'm not sure that there's one thing. I think what has probably helped me the most is to realize that this is a journey
Hmm.
and that there are different parts of a journey, just the same way as you might take a plane, a train, and an automobile to get where you're going. So too has this journey had very obvious segments to it. And sometimes those segments have been medication, sometimes they've been therapy, sometimes they've been people, sometimes they've been time. But to just sit back and say, you know what? Something bigger and stronger than me is orchestrating this voyage that I'm on. And so I'm going to sit back, open my eyes wide, and try to take in as much of the landscape, as much of the experience as I can.
Yeah. He has another question, a follow-up maybe to the first one. What did you learn, if anything, from the Grievers League? People whom you may have met and shared your journey with the grief.
What a great question. There are at least 20 answers to that I could offer you. Daddy Bear was from the south of the U.S. He's from Mississippi, and throughout our relationship, he had kept me very distant from his parents. He didn't introduce me. We never met. We never spoke. And he always said to me, you know, you have to understand, my parents are everything you might think about when you think about people from the South. They're Republican. They voted for Trump. They own a gun. They're very religious. They're anti-gay. The whole package. And so when he told me that, I believed it. When he passed, my first phone call was to his mother. And so that began a conversation, his mother and his father.
Yes.
And that began a conversation. And one of the things that happened is I wound up flying to San Francisco to clear out his apartment there.
And you never had a conversation with them before.
No,
This is the first time
the
ever.
first time I spoke to his parents was the night he died.
After
So
his
my
passing.
first conversation was, hello, by the
Andrew.
way, I'm Andrew, and by the way, your son just died.
Oh.
Yeah. So a little bit of a heady start to the connection.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And how did they receive it?
How do you imagine, right? But the interesting part of this story is that we were talking on the phone, trying to make the arrangements. When would the funeral be? Could I get to San Francisco? Could I find something for him to be buried in? Because he didn't bring much to Toronto, and they shipped the body naked back to Mississippi. And he hadn't lived where his parents were for decades, and so they didn't have any of his clothing. So it was my job to go to San Francisco, find something suitable, and bring it to Mississippi. And while we were working all of this out, before the decision was made for me to travel there, his father said to me, will you be attending the funeral? And I said, well, sir, that all depends. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, it depends whether I'd be welcome or not. Because everything that Daddy Bear had told me led me to understand that I would not be welcome. And his father got angry with me. And he said, you don't understand. We are not what our son painted us to be. And his mother took the phone at this point, and she said to me, Andy, how can I bury my son if his soulmate is not there?
Oh.
And so I flew to San Francisco with the help of an incredible group of friends there, managed to get the apartment cleaned out. And initially I was going to, I mean, that in itself is a story. Again, this is part of the magic, right? we went out. We were very active in the party scene in San Francisco. We would go to big circuit parties and dance. We knew a lot of people, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those people were friends. We would say, hi, how are you? Saw you last time. They're definitely acquaintances and people that we liked, but we weren't necessarily close with them. And so I arrived at the airport in San Francisco, and there was a lesbian couple that he was friends with, and they showed up with boxes and garbage bags and markers and packing tape and labels and a hot meal for me because I arrived at night. And
Of course,
they
yeah.
took me to his apartment, and I let myself in and began the sorting. The next day, people arrived in shifts, and I remember there was one man. He and his husband are pillars within sort of the circuit party community, and he's one of these very sort of. I don't think he'd be upset if I said he's a very motherly kind of person because he walked in in the morning and said, "Right, here's donuts for everybody. Here's breakfast for you. Clothes over there, shoes over there. You take that." And he just began ordering everybody around. And of course, it's not yet a week since Daddy Bear had died, and I'm still standing there in a state of numbness and completely stunned. And so I absolutely needed somebody to walk in and to take over the way that he did. Friends took me to a drop-off box for Goodwill. They took me to a UPS store to ship some things to his parents and to other people. And then I went back to the apartment, which was now empty, and was planning just to sleep on the floor. And two people, again, I wouldn't necessarily call them friends. I knew them to say hello, but I didn't know what they did for a living. I didn't know anything about them. They just said to me, "You're not sleeping here tonight. You're coming with us." And they took me to their home, which was beautiful. They had not just a guest room, but a guest wing. They fed me, gave me a couple of glasses of wine, and then saw me into a lift and put me on the way to the airport the next morning. So again, the whole thing just felt divinely orchestrated, and people stepped up and did things of incredible beauty that I just never expected.
And that's the true essence of humanity. Like when people are in distress and difficulty, this immediately comes up because this is the nature of human beings, and we can't be nothing but this. I mean, do people choose to withdraw from helping and leave someone away? I don't think so, because I believe in humanity. What do you think? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
My experience, and we're very far away from Yusuf's question, but we can maybe get back there.
Yes.
Is to say that grief is a funny thing because there are people who step up to the plate that you don't expect, and people that you might expect to be there suddenly aren't.
Yeah.
So, for example, my own family, we're not particularly close knit, and years before Daddy Bear's death, I knew that my family was kind of pulling away from me, not entirely sure why. I called my mother the night that Daddy Bear died, and she kind of was upset with me that I was crying. I said that I should, pull myself together and whatnot. And then, okay, fine, we ended that conversation. And that was the last time I talked to my family.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a deeper story, and there's some whys and wherefores to that. But you might think that some people would step up to the plate who don't.
Yes.
And then there are people who do that are completely surprising. And so, this is getting close maybe to an answer to Yusuf's question, is that the first people that I learned to grieve with were his parents. And what a surprise that was. I was fully expecting that people with that profile would not want a person with my profile in their lives, and yet the opposite is proven to be true.
True. Yes, and that was maybe very surprising to you, but then that was also a great, gave you maybe a great deal of comfort.
Absolutely, it did. Absolutely, it
Yes.
did.
Yes.
We continued to be very close. I was in September. I went and spent several weeks in the South. I spent a week with Daddy Bear's sister, and then a week with his parents. And in the week with his parents, his grandmother celebrated her 96th birthday. And so, so I was there for the celebration, and I've been there for her 95th, and I was there for her 94th as well. And what made me laugh this time around is when you go to her house, you don't just go for a visit. She needs this done and that done, and so within, when the party portion had kind of wound down, it was clear that she was sending her daughter and her son-in-law to get busy and to fix things around the house. She started barking at me. Andy, see that light bulb up there needs a changing? And so I had been put to work. So no longer was I a guest. I apparently
That's it. So she's already taken you from that zone,
yeah,
into her own zone.
yeah. So his mother refers to me. I call her second mother, and she when she picks up the phone, she'll say, "How is my second son?"
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And are you still in touch with them?
Yeah, I was there in September. We talk every week. We talk every week.
Okay. Awesome.
Today's Sunday, and so this is our day to reach out to one another.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
A question, another one from Sightlight, and this is relevant to the topic, which is, what is your advice to people who face such situations and how to overcome them psychologically?
Yeah. So, I can only tell you what the game changers were in my experience. And so that first life coach who helped me reframe things and got the worst of the PTSD out of the way.
Yes.
Medication did help for a time. The experience with the ketamine therapy was a game changer. And the other thing that I haven't talked about, pardon me, is my current life coach is a man named Kalen Strauss. He is known as the ecstatic life coach. Wait 1 second.
Sure.
And he was before he became a life coach, he was a devotee of a guru and lived on an ashram for 7 years. And so a practitioner of yoga, meditation, and whatnot. And his whole area of expertise is the intersection between spirituality and sexuality.
Okay.
And so I started working with him, and one of the things that he has taught me is how to sit with negative emotion. And this was very interesting to me because, very often we will talk about other people and say, well, he's repressing his feelings, and they will come bubbling up to the surface somehow. Throughout my journey, I did not think I was repressing my feelings. I talked about sadness, I talked about grief, but I was also very consciously using a tool in meditation and reflection, where when I felt sad or when I felt depressed or worried or frightened, I would consciously focus on more positive things. And I felt like this was leading me forward. One of the things that I realized, though, is that in the process, I was not creating enough space for the negative emotion that I was feeling, that I was experiencing, and so it was a kind of repression.
Yes.
And so he taught me this whole technique of sitting with your feeling. When a feeling comes along that's negative, that's uncomfortable, that's painful, when you're experiencing emotional pain, for example, not to shy away from it. Don't wallow in it and say, oh, everybody, hey, I'm in so much pain, I can't stand it. But with yourself, to sit quietly with it and to kind of look at it and say, aha, I know what that is. That's pain.
Yes.
Put a name to it. And then hopefully in a meditation, to sit back and to say, you know what, I'm going to imagine myself kind of stepping slightly back from this. I'm still feeling the feeling. I'm still conscious of where it hits. So for example, emotional pain for me is often accompanied with the symptoms of anxiety. So tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, stomach doing flip-flops, not able to digest food, bloating, joint pain. So one of the things I might do is if I'm experiencing all of this, is just to take a step back and go, okay, feel that feeling of tightness. Feel the nausea in your belly. Feel the difficulty breathing. Sit with that. Say, oh yeah, that's kind of some sort of irritation in the respiratory tract, isn't it? Oh, there's a really clenching sensation in my chest. Oh, there's a real tightness in my belly such that I feel like I'm going to throw up. Oh, my hands are shaking. Just sit back and just be present with that.
Yes.
And to watch where it goes. And similarly with your thoughts, if you can sit back and go, oh, I'm feeling really frightened today. Well, why is that? Well, I've just thought about the holidays ahead. What
Hmm.
does that mean? Well, I'm going to be alone. What does that
Yes.
feel like? It doesn't feel very nice. Where are my thoughts going now? Oh, I'm worried about the future. Will I be alone on my birthday? Will I be alone on other significant events? Isn't that interesting that my mind goes in all of these places?
Yes. You mentioned earlier spirituality and faith, and you said you yourself found reconciliation, maybe, and relief, and maybe atonement as well with faith, and it helped you somehow, um, or guided you through that path
Okay.
to getting over grief. I mean,
Your description there is incredibly Abrahamic with atonement, which implies you've done something wrong, right? And
it's not wrong, but I mean, maybe I misused the correct word. I mean, yes, in what I meant here is because I come from, a Middle Eastern background, and in the Middle East, people would definitely, first of all, have the community support because that's for granted for everyone, and then following that community support, they would definitely go to faith, and they will believe that this is part of life, death is part of life, it's very natural to lose a loved one, and they definitely have accomplished or completed their path in life, and now they have started another journey, and they're with the creator. So that's where their end point of rest lies. um, Maybe in the Western culture, from living in Canada here and living in the West for, almost 20 years now, I realized people that the Westerners maybe don't know much about death, or don't think about it. Maybe they know, but they don't think about it. They just, shun away from that idea and, cast it away because as if it doesn't exist. And then when it comes, they start to panic.
yes.
So that's my point from the question, and I apologize if I misrepresented myself in that
I'm
question.
teasing
So
you. I'm teasing you.
yes,
There's a lot of truth in what you've just said.
yes,
I think perhaps, I've lived in a couple of different places in the world and visited several others, and so I can, although I have limited experience of the Middle East, I can imagine. Certainly, one of the hallmarks of Western culture is that it's more individualist, right? And so
true,
you were seen as this individual, able to make individual choices, and not necessarily connected rather to something larger than yourself.
true,
Whereas in other places in the world, you might be more collectivist, where you're a member of a family, you're a member of a clan, a tribe, a group of people, a community, right? And so when something happens to you, these people rally around. I don't think that the spiritual or faith tools are radically different, say, in the Middle East and in the West. I mean, there are places where you can go and people will support you in a conversation of, well, where do you think your loved one is now? And what sort of state are they in? And are they suffering? Are they at peace? Are they experiencing joy and glory? There are places where you can have those conversations too.
yes,
I think the difference, though, is that it's much more loose. And so there isn't physically, in my case anyway, the community was virtual. Because
Yeah.
everybody, I'm in Toronto, he was in San Francisco, the family's in Mississippi, other friends are in Texas, and I can keep going.
All over the place.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so no one was able to physically come and sit with me. That sitting all had to happen in a virtual space,
Yes.
for example. But further to your point, where I would agree with you is that in the West, there are other milestones in life that we talk about much more openly. And we see portrayals of them in movies, on television, our friends talk to us.
Yes.
Everybody has some idea of what to do when they go to a wedding, for example. Right?
True.
Everybody knows what to do when they throw a wedding.
Or
And
a
that might
birthday party.
vary. Yeah, that might vary depending on the culture that you're from. I've been to Italian weddings where there's like 350 people. I've been to very waspy, white, Protestant sort of Anglo weddings where there's 50 people, right? And so that may change in the way that it's realized, but everybody more or less has an idea of the pattern that's to be followed, right?
True.
And so after there's the wedding, then there's the reception, then the bride and groom leave and go on a honeymoon type thing, and so on and so on.
Yes.
We don't know what to do with death.
Mm.
So sure, we call a funeral home and they take care of the body and the funeral and everything else. But then what happens? We don't know what to do with grief. And there are so many things that happened to me. So many things that left me bewildered. Excuse me.
Yes.
So many things that left me bewildered and really grasping for straws that I have come to understand are absolutely textbook typical of grief. And I wish that somebody had said, hey, this is probably going to happen to you. Or I can see that X is happening to you. And here's why.
Yes.
I wish somebody had had those conversations with me. And what I'm discovering now as I work with people who are grieving or who are recovering from trauma is that they will come to me and tell me things and say, the academic in me, we use theory to describe, explain, and predict. And they come to me and say, I'm feeling, Z. And I say to them, I can explain, I can describe and predict that for you because I've seen it so many times now.
True.
And so one of the things that I think I would like to do is to be part of a movement to change that. My experiences happened much earlier in my life than I thought they were going to. But everybody's going to experience on some level what I have been through. All of us are going to lose a loved one at some point in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so why not have the tools and the conversations beforehand that take away the unnecessary suffering?
Yes.
There's going to be pain, there's going to be grief. But I would argue that some of the suffering that I went through could have been avoided.
True. Yes. Satellite saying thank you, Zyad, for the topics you raised for discussion with Dr. Andrew. They're truly effective, important, and touch real life. Thank you. Thank you, Satellite. So, a lot have happened, and a lot has happened with you, and you definitely managed to overcome it and live with it, and you turned it into something more beneficial and useful, and you started helping others, and you entered the field of life coaching, and now you're coaching people, you're having clients, you're meeting them, you're talking with them. So you kind of flipped it now from affecting and hurting you into helping others and listening to others and give them the help that they need, which is a fantastic way, because this was your resurrection, so to speak. I mean, yes, indeed, figuratively speaking.
Okay.
from trauma and devastation, just like the phoenix, and you rise up again to live your life and move on, because that's the true essence of life. Along the way, we go through impediments, and we have accidents, and we make car crashes, but then we must come back to the path and continue, because that's the way it is. That's how life goes on. And I think you have grasped that, and you turned it into something beneficial. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you are describing something that I've experienced, maybe differently than I might, but no less true. But no less true. I choose to. Here's what I think.
Yes.
Before the pandemic, I'm at the university. I've been asked by another program, not mine, to teach a graduate course.
Yes.
And so I do. And in that class, there's a young man who is brand new to Canada. Like, he literally, when I met him in the first class, he'd literally stepped off an airplane from his home country the week before.
Okay.
Fantastic student. English on him is flawless. I was blown away. I was like, hey, do you want to come into the interpreting program? English was flawless. He'd never been outside of his homeland before, certainly never to an English-speaking country. So I was just blown away. But really motivated student, was plowing through the readings, had a million interesting questions to ask, had lots of insight into the topic. It's just a joy to have in the classroom. I'm sitting in my office one day. The door to my office is slightly ajar, and he pokes his head in and says, "Hi, Professor." I take one look at him. I stand up. I take him by the hand. I sit him down on the couch in my office. I close the door and I said, "Okay, tell me." And then the tears start.
What made you notice that?
Yeah,
he's having something?
I'll get to that in 2 seconds.
Yes.
Depression, anxiety, new country, culture shock, difficulty coping in a second language, misses family, doesn't understand how things work here. Just everything you might expect from somebody who's brand new to a situation, plus the pressure of being in graduate school and having to study hard and get good marks and all of that. So we talk for about an hour, and then I stand up again, I take him by the hand again, and I lead him to the next building where we have a counseling service. And I ring the bell, and one of the clinical psychologists on staff walks out, and I say, "Hi." I happen to know her by name. "Hi, so-and-so, this is so-and-so. I think he'd really benefit from talking to you." And from that, I let him be and walk back to my office. And you asked the absolute right question. What was it that I saw? I saw pain. I saw pain on his face. And I knew what pain looked like because I'd seen it on my face every time I looked in the mirror. The important thing about that story, though, is I would not have had that recognition before Daddy Bear died. I would not have had that ability to look at somebody and say, I think he's in trouble. Let me talk to him and find out. And I don't think, being honest with myself, I don't think I would have been quite as motivated to sit and listen to the answer. So it was at that point, and I had several other experiences like that, that I kind of went, okay, well, you might be onto something here. I was making strides in my own recovery and realizing, hey, I would not wish my experiences with grief on anyone. And if given the choice, I certainly wouldn't choose them, wouldn't choose to experience them again.
Yeah.
But I'd be lying to you if I said they hadn't made me stronger, more insightful, more compassionate, more confident. I'd be lying if I said they hadn't made me a better person. And so I think that each of us has the opportunity to look at negative experience, even really horrible, overwhelming negative experience, and to say, what can I learn from this and how can I grow?
Yeah.
And when I started taking stock of all of the ways in which I had changed, I began to say, there might be something in here that would be useful for other people.
And hence, life coaching came.
I started off at the beginning saying that the path was twofold. And It was because there came a point in our training of interpreters. What we do, we try to impart a skill set to you, and there's a point at which almost everybody acquires that skill set, and yet they stand up in an extremely stressful context, like the big exam that you have to take at the end, and
Tell me about it.
some people fall apart, or even if they do well, they sustain a lot of damage in the process, right?
Mhm.
And so my question has always been, how can I be there beside somebody and walk with them through that process with minimal damage?
Yeah.
How can I help them conquer the anxiety that they feel when they stand up to perform, because it is a performance? How do I help them not be triggered by this very intense experience, not be triggered to relive past trauma from their childhood, from their teenage years? How do I do that? What are the tools? I don't have any tools. Maybe I need some. And so that was the initial reason why I went into life coaching. And then at some point I was like, oh yeah, the whole grief thing too.
True.
So there was
So
I crafted the bio at the beginning in terms of professional and personal. Well, there was a professional and a personal that
yes.
led me there.
And I remember you training us about mindfulness and preparing us psychologically and emotionally and mentally to big deals like the final test and the exit exam. But then I heard you when you said you weren't thinking about yourself, and you felt that you needed that too, and you started taking life coaching lessons yourself, and you became the life coach that you wanted to be. Yusuf is saying, sorry, I have to sign off now, sending you both my bear-like hugs. Take care.
I will
Bye
gratefully
now.
receive that hug, Yusuf.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks for
you,
being with
Yusuf.
us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yusuf. Have a great day. And now, as we mentioned earlier, that you're having clients, you're seeing clients. So let's talk about that now.
Just allow me to frame that momentarily. It's not like I've left teaching and have suddenly gone into business for myself as a life coach.
No. This is not what it meant. No.
I happen to be on sabbatical at the moment, and my project for the sabbatical was to train as a life coach and to get this credential and perhaps work towards certification.
Absolutely.
When you go on sabbatical as a professor, you have to first submit sort of a proposal to the dean and say, this is what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to travel here, or whatever.
Well, or do this research. Yeah.
My project was, hey, I need some more tools in my toolkit, and I think this is going to do it for me. And I happen to be at a stage in the program that I'm in where we are now sort of cleared to work with clients. And there's an expectation that in order to finish the program, you'll have a certain number of client hours. And so I am seeing clients, and I kind of just put word out in my own community and said, hey, I'm doing this thing. And it's free because I'm doing it as part of my training. I'm not a professional and not charging for it.
Yes.
And so I found that I very quickly had a small group of men and who wanted to work with me, and as luck would have it, all of them, I think I'm not misspeaking when I say that all of them have had an experience with grief. Many of them, it's been a partner that has passed. Some, it's been another family member. But now, yes, I'm engaged in this work.
Very good. So how can people find you? Okay, like how can they come and say, hey, Andrew, I need help and I need someone to talk to?
Sure thing. So you can reach me via email, probably is the best thing to do.
Yes.
That's andrew.clifford@me.com.
That's the email.
Yeah, that's the email. That's probably the best way to contact me.
Okay.
What I would say is I may be a good fit for a certain person. I may not. So, for example, all of the men that I'm working with, first of all, they're all men.
Yes.
They all happen to be identifying as gay men. Most of them have lost a partner recently. And so just our backgrounds are similar. And so there's a good fit there. Somebody else, I may not be the best person for them. And
Okay.
so one of the things that happens, that happens in the process is that usually we'll set up an interview at the beginning, and it's as much for the client to interview me as it is for me to interview the client. And if at the end of that initial meeting, both sides think that there's value in moving further, then we will.
Hmm.
Or if I think that you could probably benefit from talking to a life coach, I can refer you to classmates and other people that I know. Or if I can see that no, this is really something that's probably better dealt with by another professional, then I'll make that suggestion to you. Yeah.
Yes. Very good. So, are there any limitations to life coaching?
We sort of hinted at them in our discussion earlier on.
Yes.
If it's something, for example, that's identified as a pathology, like for example, that it's clinical depression or PTSD or what have you, at that point, go see go see somebody who
Yes.
has the expertise to deal with something that's identified as a pathology, as a condition, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, would you also like, in addition to that, to work with a life coach? Why not? Right? I told you my story. I was seeing at one point
Yes.
four different mental health professionals a week, including a psychiatrist, psychologist, and two life coaches.
Yes. So, if someone is starting with life coaching and wants to find the right or the suitable life coach, how can they find them? Do you
Um,
just Google, I'm looking for a life
you
coach, or
can, you can, you
you
can, and so there
can?
are certainly good people out there who you will find through a Google search. Um, the body that I happen to be working with to do my training is called the Canada Coaching Academy,
Yes.
and they can refer you to people as well. Or if you want to hit me up, then I can try to help you link to the same to a good person as well.
Yes.
Like if you're sure that you want to work with a life coach, then we can give that a try. And the people that I know are like me in training, and so perhaps there would not be a cost involved because they,
Of
like me,
course.
are needing to bank their hours in order to successfully complete their training.
Yes, definitely. Andrew, we've been talking for 1 hour and 33 minutes and I didn't even feel it. I'm looking at the time now and oh my God, I have a lot to talk with Andrew, and you are such a pleasant person to talk with.
Oh, well, thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for coming here and thank you for joining me in this broadcast today and talk to the people about your personal story. Maybe we have a question from a new one that just came in from Lola Ama. How you deal with flashbacks that vividly aligned with bad experiences?
Yeah. So Lola, that is absolutely one of the classic symptoms of PTSD
Mhm.
is to close your eyes and to see that flashback or to be triggered by something. Initially, for example, I had a great deal of difficulty going outside when a siren went by, like an ambulance. That was very triggering. I can only tell you what my experience was. My experience, I got connected with someone. In my case, it happened actually to be a life coach who was able to help me reframe and think about the experience very differently. So it is a very standard part of grief to look at what's happened and to say it's my fault. If I had done this or if I had done that, then he'd still be alive. And I went through that. And in my case, because the woman I worked with was a nurse, she actually knew the biological side of it. And so what we think happened is that he had a brain aneurysm that burst. And so she
Hmm.
said to me, I said, oh, he had pain in his clavicle. I should have thought, middle-aged man, pain in the chest, heart attack, go to hospital. I should have taken him to the hospital. If I take him to the hospital, he'd still be here. She sat me down very gently and said, hey, actually, let's reframe that, because 50% of people who have a brain aneurysm die. And so he could have been surrounded by doctors in the ER. He could have been in an operating room. And if he had had the brain aneurysm right there on the operating table, there's still a very strong likelihood that he would have died, even surrounded by doctors. And she said to me, what would be different? And I said, no. And she said, he would have died and you wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that conversation, the flashback stopped. Because I had reframed the experience and said, no, it wasn't this horrible thing. I'd actually, as we said earlier, been there to ensure that somebody I love had a good death.
And maybe also that was his time. Like, if you look at from a spiritual way, a spiritual perspective, that maybe it's a cultural thing too, that we think that was his moment, and he just passed in a very good way,
It's
peacefully, calmly in the arms of the man that he loved.
It's interesting you say that, because it has been my experience that even the people who are atheists or don't have particularly strong faith, that eventually the conversation moves in that direction. When they start letting go of the guilt and begin to move forward, one of the things that happens very often is, oh, you know what? I realize now that even if I had been there, even if I had done this, even if I had done that, there's a very strong likelihood that the outcome would have been the same.
Yeah, because it's going to happen. That's inevitable.
It's very hard to accept that in the face of something so overwhelming. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the thing that I was most afraid of in life actually happened. The thing that scared me, the worst thing that I could have imagined in life was losing my partner, and it happened. So it's not an exaggeration to say that that was very difficult.
Yeah.
At the same time, where does the guilt come in? It's almost a way for us to say, I'm going to take some control back from this uncontrollable situation. I'm going to try to imagine that an alternate universe, another version of me did this thing, and he's still with us, and he survives, and everything is good. But there comes a point when you let that go and you say, you know what, I did not have any control over this. People do die. Sometimes it feels like it's a bolt of lightning that strikes them down from out of the blue, completely unexpected. But it is part of the rhythm of life. And there comes a point when you have to let that in.
True. Andrew, thank you so much. And I will really love to see you again if you have time to talk more about more details about life coaching, or maybe we talk about interpreting. Maybe you can switch gears and talk about interpreting and translation and the Master of Conference Interpreting in London. I know this is not the time for it because...
Well, there was one question, though, that today wanted to know, yeah?
Yes, there was a question from Sightlight regarding that, and he wanted to know... I'm trying to locate the question. He said, firstly, I would like to thank my friend, Dr. Zyad, who impelled the way to us to meet Dr. Andrew by his channel. I have a question, Doctor. Can you give us an outline of how you get MA in conference interpreting?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out the most effective way of providing an answer in a short period of time. Because I'm on sabbatical, I'm not sure right now who's staffing which email address and whatnot. So maybe the best thing, if you are actually interested in our program, which is taught, the first year is taught entirely online, so you don't need to be in Canada. The second year, there are segments where you have to be in Toronto with us, but other segments where you can be far away. Maybe the easiest thing is to write to me at my personal email address, and I'll figure out who you need to connect to. Right now, we have a program. As I mentioned, it's largely taught online. There is a test that you have to take, the aptitude test, which is also done online. And the aptitude test requires you to do two things. The first is to answer a series of questions that are about current events in your language culture, in your target market. And then there's a short passage, sort of a memory test. You listen to a very short speech, like 2 minutes long, in one language. For example, if you're working between English and Arabic, you might hear one in Arabic. And then with no notes, when the speech is over, you give it back in English. And then you do it the other way as well. And that's the aptitude test. So, yeah, write to me if you want, and I'll guide you through the process.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sightlight, for your question. Andrew, thank you so much for coming. And like I said, I hope to meet you again to talk about interpreting and linguistics in general and applied linguistics. I would thank also all the friends who joined today and asked us questions and said hello to us, and hope to see you again very soon, Andrew. And I definitely will keep in touch with you. So thank you for coming today. And
thank you for the opportunity. Really grateful to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you. Take care. Have a wonderful Sunday.